Hey, what up? The devs have been giving players things we never thought we would get in the last few expansions. We've asked for proper talents, and we got talents reworked. We asked for support classes, we got one in augmentation. We asked for the support class to be nuked. Augmentation is now one of the worst specs in the game. Mythic Plus revamp, tier sec catalyst, more content in between patches, spawn points in raids, and so much more. Some of these were bangers, especially if we're talking about the Red Paladin rework, while others, like Delves and Hero Talents, are still under a big fat question mark. The thing is, whether we like to admit it or not, the devs are listening, just maybe not as much as we would like. But we do have a list of 10 changes that will 100% make Midnight a banger, and our prediction is that at least half of them will make it into the game. Oh, and stay tuned until the end because I might have some spicy things and takes to say that maybe a lot of you have been feeling over the years that need to be said out loud. The easiest to start with is player housing, but we already know player housing is going to be in the game, so why have it on the list? Well, because it has to be done right. Now we know a fair bit about what they want it to be and it's looking good already. But let me remind you of the comparison it has had over the last few months with garrisons, which also looked and sounded great on paper before Warlords of Draenor was released, and we all know how that turned out. Player housing, thankfully, looks like it's shaping up to be a much better system, and if anything, one that the players are at least in part involved in, at least as a source of feedback. Player housing has to be done right, however much pressure this might put on the devs since it cannot be an expansion gimmick. This is the type of system that has to remain evergreen, and although we are off to a great start, it's important not to forget the past. Next up is class reworks. This is another we are pretty sure will continue to happen as it has so far, but there are a few that have to be addressed before anything else, and the top 3 on our list start with Warrior. We already made a video about what we would do to Warrior if we were in charge of reworking, what type of abilities we would give, mechanics, and how to modernize it to keep up with classes like Shamans and Mages. It cannot just have some talents moved around, some buffs to utility, and then call it a day. The same thing can be said about Druid, which might very well be the hardest class to actually design in World of Warcraft, and it is probably because of the reason you suspect. The fact that Druid has 4 specs that each fulfill one of the 4 roles in the game, from tank and healer to melee and range damage dealer, makes it harder to create a cohesive class talent tree that embodies the Druid fantasy and keeps the unique flavor of each of its specs. And if this was everything, we might not have this issue, but the specs themselves are questionable in terms of what they want to accomplish. Feral and Balance seem to be a shadow of their former selves, propped up by the hero talent, at least in the case of Balance Druid. Bears seem to have had some momentum going in Dragonflight with the new talents it got in Raise and Tooth and Claw, as well as Thorns of Iron, but now a third of the stuff it has almost never gets played, and hasn't been the case in a while. Not to mention that after being oppressively strong in Season 2 of Dragonflight, the devs are treating it with so much caution, I have huge doubts if it can shine outside of a rework. Resto Druid, to be fair, I might be tripping balls, but it seems to be the only one that has some diversity and interesting design that can shape up into multiple playstyles that have been identified with the spec for years. Likely not without its issues, of course. Last would be Death Knight, particularly Blood and Frost. However, Unholy still has some lingering issues that never got addressed. But for Blood and Frost, they are almost entirely the same specs that have been for at least 3 expansions now. Frost had a bit of more nuance baked into its auto attacks and Frost Strike, not enough to alter the only 2 existing playstyles, Breath of Sindragosa and Not That. While Blood has been hammered down with the change to Death Strike, making the spec play a bit more methodically, but increasing the punishment for failing was raised way high. Bone Storm functions slightly different in consuming bone shields and not runic power, but the rest is mostly the same. Gorfin's Grasp is incredibly costly to get. Damage reduction cooldowns still work against its active mitigation design, which in turn will always remain either underwhelming or extremely broken if a tier set like the Sepulchre one ever comes back. As much as I love it and a few other specs have a design that is outdated when compared to modern encounter design. Similar to classes, but more involved, I would argue, are the hero talents. I am curious, how many of you have had baller expectations when you heard Dark Ranger Hunter and ended up playing what was available at release? They have taken that reception and reworked Dark Ranger into a drastically better hero talent, but the damage was done. Together with other hero talents that either disappointed the expectations of eager players or continue to be so incredibly passive with no actual player choice involved that they are mostly a set and forget, I'm pretty sure they will be addressed. But as a core identity of the War Within and by association the extended World Soul Saga, the opportunity misses we had need to be fixed, from them being flavorfully meaningful but also address the lackluster animations most people assume they would have to offer. Most of the issues people have been having with raids have been surprisingly addressed over the last 2 expansions, with one still remaining. I'm not sure how this can fit into the current content cadence and how the patch cycle seems to be, but I'm not sure either of this would be reason enough to not consider it further and maybe find a way to add mini raids again. For better or worse, Legion set a very high standard when it came out from so many points of view. Class design, campaign, class campaign, and order halls, unique weapons, legendaries, content galore, raids upon raids, and so many dungeons I don't think I've done them all. Mini raids need to come back. If the in-between patch content releases have shown anything, is that an added endgame content to chase and clear and farm is something people are willing to do. Siren Isle could have come with a short 3 boss raids that either was the source of the ring or exploited its powers and gave us options to upgrade it, instead of doing the same old dailies and rare farms we ended up doing. Same thing with the Turbo Boost event that just happened a few weeks ago. Particularly this last one has made the game so much more alive. And all it took was a few more eye levels to grind, a vendor that gave people deterministic rewards, even if it was capped, and, ironically uncapped, crests to farm and access alts at an easier pace, doing what actually is fun in the game, playing it. On your main, on your alt, or just collecting a plethora of new cosmetics. And speaking of recently released content, we need a new type of content that is similar to what roguelike games are. We made this point before, but back in the alpha for Shadowlands, when Torghast was just climb as high as you can and stack ridiculous powers until you ended up doing the kind of damage we are doing now, 2 expansions later. People loved it. You climb with different powers every time and always strive to hit a higher floor. If anything, this is what Mythic Plus dungeons are. This is what the current Horrific Visions are as well. People really seem to love this. It fulfills their player power fantasy, and it gives them meaningful progression that doesn't feel mandatory for resources or power capped every week for a FOMO effect. War Within came with delves. That's great, but that's not for everyone. Yes, more casual and time-constrained players needed something like this, and I'm happy for them, but new content isn't something just casual players want, and the question mark content for the Underpin or Zegvir from the last patch was not really the Mage Star challenge mode people have been asking for, although it did come pretty close. WoW has a problem with its formula. It's old and predictable, and I know the devs are aware of this. Player housing will be a wild card in this formula, and that's fantastic. But it is also niche, and doesn't involve direct gameplay, but rather a more Sims-like approach to WoW. We need gameplay, something other than raids and dungeons all the time. Going back to an older talking point that we are kind of 90% sure is being considered, Mythic Plus needs to reward Mythtrack gear. I know what you're about to say. I know, because you've told us so many times, at least when I ranted like a monster on stream so many times. Also, check it out, twitch.tv/Marcelian&Flame. Mythic Plus cannot reward gear the same way raids can, and cannot do it at the same level. Mythic Plus can be spammed, raids cannot. Raids have a higher barrier of entry, hence the increased rewards. But the model we currently have is not good enough anymore. One random Mythtrack item per week feels very unrewarding and has transformed the Vault, which was supposed to be a bad luck protection, into the only source of Mythtrack gear for players that enjoy just doing dungeons and pushing them higher and not want to feel forced to raid. We can start conservatively with it. Maybe 1 drop per dungeon at plus 15 or higher. Maybe you are capped at 2 to 3 per week somehow, either through a vendor or with a tracker like how level 11 delves reward a max of 21 gilded crests per week. Whichever the case, the vault cannot be a source of loot people count on. It has to be the, alright, maybe I can get the item that hasn't dropped yet. The vault should just be what coins for extra rolls on items used to be back in Worlds of Draenor and earlier. Revamp the trader's tenders. The trading post, I believe, has been a success in almost all cases. We can argue some of the artistic choices that have flooded it some months ago, but the potential for this content is so large it's baffling it hasn't yet been tapped. The track to farm the tenders every month is good to keep people engaged, and it's a battle pass, bro. Say what you want. It's a battle pass. One that is free though. What it should do is continuously offer little activities that reward tenders from all sorts of gameplay, like farming all raids, leveling up old reputations, doing old elves and dungeons once, something that people can just casually do for cosmetics. I cannot see why a daily world quest cannot reward me with 1 trading tender, and I can stack them up and empty the inventory at the end of the month. You can still get the big items by not feeling forced to game every day, but if you are an everyday gamer, even if you log in for an hour or 2, why can't those hours be put into getting more tenders? This can also open up the trading post to offer more and more stuff. It can also be intersected with potential player housing cosmetics. People get bored of doing just dungeons and raids and the occasional delve, and this can keep them in the game longer, the game livelier, and you wouldn't have to resort to dinar vendors halfway through the patch to catch people's eyes anymore. Bring dungeon sets back. A video made by Dradno some 1 week ago made me realize there are already crafted items that can form sets, and we had them since the Profession revamp at least, and yet they haven't been used at all. Going back to the issue of WoW being too formulaic, why can't we have more than 1 gear set? It doesn't have to be a dungeon set, but a dungeon set that has its bonuses only work in dungeons could solve the issue of dungeon-only players feeling they need to raid. I know people are afraid of having yet another set of items to grind, but you only really need to grind them if you do dungeons, which you already do. The difference is that the current dungeons give you catalyzed items that turn into a raid tier set anyway. And this would just be more content to do. You cannot say you don't have content to do, but then not like it when more content is added. Mandatory farms are boring, and I agree, but having more than 1 item set for different parts of the game is a fun thing. Swapping in items to suit different encounters is a core RPG mechanic, and we used to have this a long time ago. They don't have to be equal in strength to tier sets, they don't have to be for dungeons specifically, but flipping the formula of the game is the way to make it interesting, different, and not the same old thing every patch. If this was 2008, these next 2 would be something obvious, but it doesn't seem like it today. First, I want a different story. I'm tired of the soft, boring, safe, and woke storylines. Those can have their place, but for the love of God, give me a fantasy story. Give me controversial choices and characters that I have to root for. Give me epic moments of pure coolness and badassery like what the game was built on. Stop the councils of convened opinions. It's a boring way to tell a story. It feels like you are trying to say sorry for something, aren't you? I want to be a part of an epic story, fighting for an unpredictable cause and outcome, one where we don't all hug each other at the end and sing Kumbaya. We all know that's bullshit. And last, give us a World of Warcraft new class. I'm sure there are all these cool Dungeons and Dragons and Final Fantasy ideas for classes like televangelists or fluffy stuffed toy that makes my non-existing girlfriend want to play the game. Newsflash, that ain't happening. You have a bunch of 30, 40 something year olds that fell in love with demons burning people from the inside out, massacred cities, and stories of justice. Give us a tinker for crying out loud. Give us a spellbreaker blood elf that uses the mana of its enemies to burn out their veins. Give us a gladiator class like what Varian, Thrall, and other cool and badass characters have been through. A necromancer that doesn't stop summoning skeletons to fight the enemies. Give us an ethereal prince class that uses artifacts and void magic to fight enemies in midnight. I'm sure everyone has 10,000 classes on their personal list that we have come to know in the characters of WoW and never seem to get them because these people that played WoW for 2 days want to bring their Final Fantasy jobs into WoW. And these just to start with. If we missed one thing that you hope to see in Midnight, shoot us a comment down below and check our video on the top 10 must-have races in the game following the same premise, the premise of Warcraft being Warcraft.